welcome viewers to our second episode of our new podcast called Polaris. And on this episode, we have present Dr. Charles Daly, Michael Palmer, Hans Vogel, and Laurent Guillenot. If I forgot a doctor in there somewhere, please excuse me. And me, Sietse Bosman, I will be acting as a host tonight. And we will be talking about an article that will be that Hans has just read as an intro to this episode.
The EU Holy Trinity: theft, war and censorship. The other day, there was a small crisis in the party that won last year's Dutch elections. A politician by the name of Nathalie van Berkel, to be appointed junior finance minister responsible for taxes, had to give up her seat in parliament because she had been caught cheating with her CV. Though she affirmed having an MA, she was never able to finish the freshman year of law school. With the current level of higher education, which hardly exceeds that of secondary education 30 years ago, that is certainly an achievement in itself. Cheating and plagiarism seem to be common in the EU ruling elite, especially among women. EU President Ursula von der Leyen barely managed to escape public humiliation for having plagiarized her own MD dissertation. Many other EU elite figures have been caught lying and cheating about their accomplishments. Therefore, the EU's ruling elite, which is more numerous than many would believe, seems to be passing through a crisis. The ruling elite, composed of a bit of royalty here and there, elected politicians, CEOs, businessmen, bankers, power brokers, underworld bosses, university professors, etc., stands at the pinnacle of a veritable army of civil servants of more than 26 million. That is an awful lot of people, considering that the real European population of the EU, not counting the largely Muslim North Africans, Middle Easterners and Central Asians, even if they hold citizenship of a EU country, is only about 400 million. Subtracting pensioners, children, secondary and tertiary students, it would mean that about 1 out of every 8 jobs in the EU is somewhere in the bureaucracy. It is obvious the EU has a giant bureaucracy. The central one in Brussels is rather moderate, with a couple of tens of thousands. But the various partner states each have their own national, communal and civil each have their own national, local and communal civil servants. No wonder that taxes are as high as they are, with EU citizens on average paying a total of between 70 and 80% of their income in taxes. That still is not enough for the EU elites, controlled and directed by the World Economic Forum and associate outfits such as the Trilateral Commission and the Bilderberg Group, as well as others. From 2028, the Dutch state will begin to tax unrealized profits. This means that if the value of one's real estate or investment portfolio has increased, even if the owner doesn't sell his property or investment, the government plans to rake in 36% of that value increase. Theft has many faces, and this is one of them. Before long, the other EU members will enact comparable legislation, which will enable them to finalize the dismantling and destruction of the middle class. The future will exclusively belong to the rich and super-rich, sucking the blood of stultified proletarian masses. The entire educational system in the EU seems designed especially to keep those masses under control. Primary education is a joke. Secondary education is hardly better, but the biggest scandal is the level of higher education. Those who today acquire an academic title, contemporary EU degrees like Bachelor of Science, MSc, BA, MA, even PhD, are all utterly devoid of the kind of true academic knowledge such as was still imparted a generation ago. No problem really, because all graduates will be subjected to daily brainwashing with government-issued fake news and disinformation. Dutifully, they will swallow everything their governments tell them, hook, line and sinker. As they are told by the government-controlled MSM to get angry about fake news and disinformation, a few of them will begin to question what they hear and see. Some will find alternative sources of information, and it is to make them that impossible that the EU elites are now devoting so much energy to impose ever stricter forms of censorship. The few remaining dissident groups and small organizations need to be silenced once and for all. Typically, they are being accused of spreading disinformation and hate speech, and if that fails to shut them up, they get accused of incitement, racism, and as a weapon of last resort, anti-Semitism. This last term is confusing because it actually means someone Jews hate, rather than the person who hates Jews. While chastising its citizens for hate speech and anti-Semitism on a daily basis, the United States, the EU rulers themselves spew out hate against Russia and anyone who does not agree with them. The EU's first and second harpies, von der Leyen and Kallas, never cease to amaze with their ignorance, stupidity and vulgarity. It is truly remarkable that two such utterly intelligent and incapable women have been appointed, not elected, to lead the EU. As a matter of fact, they are of the same caliber as Dutch politician Van Berkel, who a couple of days ago left the stage. Like her, von der Leyen and Kallas are truly an insult to womanhood. At the recent Munich Security Conference, the EU ruling elite, together with the rulers of several EU member states and England, made yet another appeal for war with Russia. A few generations ago, before women had entered politics in great numbers, it was commonplace to say that women would make politics more humane, less aggressive, softer, and really so much better. Apparently nothing came of these solemn promises, repeated high and low and everywhere. Today we have the shrieking harpies Ursula and Kaya as EU commissars and so many other bloodthirsty ones in EU member states clamoring for an all-out war against Russia. The chorus is now also led by NATO's hermaphrodite-in-chief Rutte, in which Emmanuel Macron also likes to sing along. You see, even male politicians have become feminized and yet talk tough, using all those big words. It is the women and the effeminate who want war. Isn't it remarkable? If a war with Russia should not come about, it looks like there is going to be a war against Iran, in which these charming female and effeminate politicians would no doubt very much like to take part. Grim warnings have also been heard lately about impending civil wars in several EU countries and England. After having imported millions of non-Europeans as modern brown battalions, together with the global stormtroopers of Antifa, the EU ruling elite may also decide to unleash a big civil war. It seems just a matter of time before another big war will hit Western Europe. It may be just a war against Russia or a war against Iran or even China, which Trump is reputedly getting ready. A civil war or two or more wars rolled into one. By the looks of it, Ursula, Kaya, Mark, Macron and all their ilk will thoroughly enjoy the violence, destruction and disruption that seems to be heading our way. There is a small glimmer of hope, and that is that the EU will implode under its own weight, taking with it all EU national governments. If not, the EU holy trinity of theft, war and censorship may be ruling over the continent for a long time, until it has become a total wasteland.
And it's a broad critique on the European Union and the lack of quality of people in it, and nepotism and lying about CVs and stuff like that. And I was wondering which of you fine gentlemen would like to make his first remarks regarding the article.
Well, if we want to address the honesty subject first, is that the main theme, do you think? The dishonesty of leaders in Europe right now, since we're talking about lying on CVs, etc.
Yeah, I guess you could say that's a broad theme.
Well, I mean, just generally speaking, a lot of philosophers have talked about how the absence of trust breaks down society. If there's no trust, then no other values really have any meaning. And if there's no honesty, there can't be trust. Just in general terms, I was kind of wondering about how to approach this article because I don't know exactly where Hans is going with it, other than just pointing out that there are dishonest people leading Europe into oblivion.
Well, I can answer that because I observed that in over the last couple of months, that the European leadership is clamoring for war, and that they want to increase censorship or impose censorship in various more stringent forms all over the European Union. in France, in Germany, in the Netherlands, in Spain, everywhere, in Austria. And this is a notable phenomenon. And also the fact that the thing I quoted about the Dutch politician seems to me symbolic. That people get away with lying, and that's the essence of their duty. And also that the level of people governing us, ruling us, has been decreasing so rapidly. I think this is very important to notice. The mere intellectual and moral quality, but especially intellectual quality of people that sort of reign over us, rule us, is so bad, so awfully bad, that I wonder how this system can really survive at all. If not, how can people accept it? People who are university trained, intellectuals, middle class, other people, non-governmental elites, people who have sort of, as they say, an IQ above room temperature, this sort of thing. How can they tolerate what's happening? That's amazes me. That's all. That's what I wanted to emphasize and to point out.
Yes.
I guess I look at this from like a meta level where a lot of the leaders in Europe seem to be just opportunists who don't really have any connection to their people or their land. And I don't know if that can be developed later in life. If you don't get that from the beginning when you're raised, like I'm from Texas, and most Texans are proud to be from Texas and to defend other Texans. And the European nations used to be that way, and maybe there are a lot of Europeans still that way, but the people in charge are not that way. And so, I mean, that leads to one vice like that, being an opportunist, I think allows for you justifying lying pervasively, in order to get whatever you need because you don't really feel any connection to the people around you. So, I mean, it's a very holistic problem that has a lot of dimensions to it. And I don't know, without just completely removing these people, I don't know if they can improve.
Agreed. All right. So, Michael, I see you raised your hand.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think one observation is that as bad as the people in the EU institutions are, they are on the same level as the national politicians. I mean, Mark Rutte, whom you mentioned, I mean, he is now leading NATO, but he came from national Dutch politics and he didn't really change between those two offices, right? So same sort of caliber. Von der Leyen used to be German defense minister. And in that capacity, she actually rejected the delivery of a new tank, a new armored fighting vehicle to the troops, because she observed that pregnant women could not fit through the hatches of this new vehicle. So it had to be rejected and redesigned. So this is the sort of mental caliber of people that we have, both mental and moral caliber of people that we have in European politics altogether. And it's not limited to Europe even. I mean, here I live in Canada and I find people that are cut from the same cloth, essentially, the same intellectual and moral caliber.
Yes.
And I'm old enough also to have observed the decline over a couple of decades. And it is my impression that the caliber, the moral and intellectual caliber of our so-called leaders declined in proportion that the demands made on the national governments and also on EU institutions, EU leaders, were more and more, right? They were asked to implement policies that were more and more hostile to their own peoples. So you would have to recruit more and more traitorous individuals in order to actually go along with these agendas. I think that indeed we have some sort of anonymous kind of, not quite global, but very far-reaching the unified government in the West. I mean, has become very obvious at the very latest in the COVID festivities, in which all governments implemented more or less the same absurd, stupid, and harmful policies, and they use the same kind of slogans in order to sell these policies to their people, and the same kind of repressive measures in order to enforce those stupid policies. So that's clear evidence to me. I mean, no single national government should have been as stupid as to adopt any of these policies, but all of them went along with all of them. So I think that's as good de facto evidence as you can expect to get of a very comprehensive determination of all these policies from behind the scenes. And the more oppressive the agenda of this secret government has become, the more rotten the caliber of so-called leaders. And the EU is just one of many manifestations.
Well, I think that Hayek wrote a book called The Road to Serfdom, and I don't necessarily agree with all of his philosophy, but he did point out that the worst of society basically rise to the top, because you have to be merciless and you have to be ruthless and you have to be an absolute power junkie in order to rise up through the ranks of our elites and our power structures. And I believe there has been research has been done into the prevalence of psychopaths among politicians, and I believe that in all of the United States, Washington D.C. was an absolute hotspot for psychopathic behavior, and that would indicate, or at least explain, why they are so unaffected by the suffering of the people that they are supposed to govern. So, Laurent, you have something to say about this?
Well, yeah, I was just reminded of one article I wrote about democracy. It's an article on the UNS Review called Our Ruling Class. It was started, I started from the book by Italian political scientist Gaetano Mosca called The Ruling Class. And he's among what I think, what's his name, James Burnham classifies as a Machiavellian. So this book by James Burnham changed my view on Machiavelli. Because according to Burnham, the Machiavellians are just realists. And the realists understand that democracy is impossible. Democracy is a lie by definition. And because democracy is a lie, it tends to promote into power liars. You know, in order to be elected, you have to lie. I mean, that's the rule of the game, because you have to make more promises than your adversaries. So you have to. And it seems to me that we have reached a point where lying, is the almost the only rule of the game. How to be elected, you just throw, as many lies as you can. So it seems to me like we have reached the end, the ultimate normal end of democracy, where finally most our leaders understand that it's all about lying to the public in order to be elected. And so there is, if the basic problem is lying, then it all comes down to a problem of democracy. Democracy may work, as I believe the Greeks believed, or even Rousseau believed. It can work on the city level, be under maybe 50,000 inhabitants. It can work because people know each other, so they know who are the psychopaths. But beyond that point, it seems to me that democracy is the problem. I mean, if we want to search for the root of the problem, we understand the symptoms. We are ruled by liars and psychopaths who lie to our face. So that's almost the definition of a psychopath: a man who can lie with charisma and manipulate you. And isn't it, the problem? Basically, democracy is finally dead. That's what I could bring into the debate. Yeah.
All right. So, Charles?
I have a question with respect to that.
Yes.
To me, that brings up the question that most people don't like to talk about today. of whether some cultures are more tolerant of pervasive lying than others? And could this be a nefarious reason why certain immigrants are allowed to enter regions because they'll tolerate certain vices more than other cultures will tolerate those vices? It's just a question.
Michael?
It's an interesting question, but I'm not going to outright address it. I like Laurent's comments on democracy, but I think democracy is not all about lying. I mean, there are the occasional figures that actually do occasionally speak the truth. For example, in Hungary, we can observe this, and that leader is really very popular in his country. And we had in Romania an election that was recently stolen because they also threatened, or they actually had already manifested the victory of a leader who dared to speak the truth about the EU, about the war in Ukraine, and so on, and about Romania's national interests. I mean, we see evidently that that in the nations within the European bloc, such leaders as actually attempt to bring to the fore the national interest. Also in Italy, we have seen some of that leaders who try to bring to the fore the national interest, they are actually suppressed by the so-called elites. And if need be, their elections are, if they have been elected, these elections are simply outright invalidated and somebody else, some lying puppet is installed in their place. So I don't think it is correct to entirely put the blame on the people themselves. Gullible as so they may be in large part, right, to some of the lies. And indeed, I also doubt that you can get anywhere in any democracy by being radically honest. But you also see, for example, that in the United States, people like Rand Paul and Thomas Massie, who at least occasionally dare to speak the truth, they are hugely popular and they have to be kept down with all kinds of chicanery. So I think democracy, I mean, it has reached this rotten state, not, I think, because of its own intrinsic failings, but because it is being stage managed from behind. And I actually think that democracy is popular for that very reason. Modern democracy has been invented because it can be so easily controlled and subverted from the outside. It is always the autocrats that are a threat to the rule of the so-called global elite. The autocrats who actually assume very great power within their nations, they have often been able to wrest control of their nations back from global control and to pursue the actual national interest. Right, there are some unspeakable names from history which actually lend themselves here. I think one example is, for example, Adolf Hitler. Another one is Joseph Stalin. Both of these, they are a bit very. Both of them have a very bad name in the history books, and I think part of that is in both cases that they actually managed to defy the globalists that had previously gained control of these two countries, but who lost control of those countries when these autocratic rulers ascended to power. And in order to prevent the recurrence of such events, I think democracy has been invented. This is the form of government in which nobody, no single person can accumulate that sort of power and then, as a consequence of that, be in a position to wrest control of the nation back from the globalists.
Yeah, well, I think one important distinction to make is that in ancient Greece, democracy was also, to a large degree, aristocratic in the sense that only citizens got the right to vote. And only a handful of people were actually citizens. 75% of the population were slaves. And now everybody gets citizenship when he reaches his adult age. And I think that some of the problems now we have, I think, go back to the French Revolution with and the rise of the after the let's say after the French Revolution and the rise of the bourgeoisie. We get bourgeois mentality everywhere, and that is only interested in capital gains and money and welfare, whereas an aristocrat would rule from very different principles. And I think this is something that can be seen among our politicians and our elites is that they seem solely motivated by profit, by gain, by money, and they have basically a view of their own populations as a collection of economic entities.
Yeah, there's a constant refrain in the United States, usually by Democrats. They'll refer to our democracy. We need to preserve our democracy instead of our constitutional republic. We don't have a pure democracy, but that's the phraseology they always use. And a lot of citizens just eat it up. I mean, they really believe we have a pure democracy. That's just why you have a tax on the Electoral College, I think. But you mentioned ancient Greece. I mean, Plato had a rather dim view of pure democracy. And I think, I can't remember if it was Plato or Aristotle, democracy was the next to the worst form of government, after a pure tyranny. And so we have this sort of idealistic definition of democracy that doesn't really match the traditions of the West, but it's sort of this utopian ideal. To me, it's more Marxian than it is Western. I would make a distinction there. And there's a page I was looking at Evola yesterday, and this essay. Let's see. I won't read the entire thing unless you want me to, because it's almost a page. But it's from Personality, Freedom, and Hierarchy, and he talks about how liberalism and individualism are at the beginning and at the origin of the various interconnected forms of modern subversion, and that they inevitably lead to communism. They're just democracy is a deceptive intermediate state, as someone alluded to earlier. Really, it's a lie. Laurent mentioned.
Well, this is exactly what Marx himself said, that democracy was a prerequisite to socialism and communism after that. It was an absolutely necessary step.
Charles mentioned individualism, and of course, democracy in a holistic environment where people talk to each other, when people have a strong collective interest and so on. I mean, there are many factors, of course. I think democracy by itself is just a word, and there are many different kinds of democracy actually. And the social environment is, of course, a key element. And I'm thinking a lot about individualism and the root of individualism. But in a democracy, when people are individualistic, of course, they have no interest, no collective interest. They are only moved by their own selfish interest. So, of course, this kind of situation makes it very easy for liars to make all kinds of promises. And since people don't communicate, they don't have a clear sense of, individualistic people are easily manipulated. So it's true that in a social environment where people have a strong clanic connections and a patriotic sense, they would talk to each other. They would easily probably understand who are the people, who are the leaders that they need, and so on. So there are different kinds of factors. Democracy as a system is of course not the only problem. There are deeper problems in our societies. Yeah.
Hans, I saw you raise your hand.
Yes. By coincidence, I had a colleague when I was still working at the university called Antonio Annino. He was an Italian historian, very clever, intelligent person, and who studied elections in Latin America. And I talked to him a lot, and also people around him who researched the topic. I'm talking about 20, 30 years ago. And he said, democracy is never perfect. We still haven't reached the perfect system where everybody votes. Because if you, like today, if a child 6-year-old or 7-year-old can decide whether he becomes a man or a woman, or a boy or a girl, and have transsexual, become a transgender, whatever, assisted by the health system, health authorities, and the health system, why cannot they vote? Why can people who are 7 years old not vote? Why can you join the army when you're 16 years old in the Netherlands, and you cannot vote until you're 18? Why can you sort of put your life on the in the balance and go fight for your country when you're 16 years old, and you cannot vote? why can you ride a scooter or a motorcycle when you're 16 and not vote yet? So voting is still not complete. There's still not full sort of full suffrage, complete suffrage, because basically everybody 7 years old or who can read and write, 6 years older and older, should vote. So the democracy we have, our democracy, we also say the same thing in Europe, doesn't exist. It is not perfect, and it's far from perfect. There are still so many percentages of people who can be given the right to vote, and that would be total chaos, of course.
Because the answer is it's the needs of the state, not principles, not ethical principles. That's just a facade. That's the answer.
Yeah, sure.
The state needs younger fighters. It doesn't need younger voters yet.
No.
When it does need them, then that will change.
Yeah, but from a general point of view, a more holistic point of view, why shouldn't they be given the right to vote?
Oh, right, right.
The history of the right to vote is basically the history of the enlargement of the right to vote. First, there were only a few citizens who could vote. Then more citizens. Then they had they lifted the barrage, so the limit of income, so that people even with little or no income could go vote. And then women were allowed to vote. So it's continuous increase of the number of voters.
But all those stages can be explained either as based upon principle or as based upon the needs of the state. I mean, I think that sort of a lot of the population's been mystified by this Hegelian march toward freedom, where freedom is realized. Maybe that's just the propaganda for the population.
It could very well be. No, it could very well be. We don't know. Could be.
Yeah.
All right, Michael, I see you want to say something.
We should then take this to the logical conclusion and not only include children, but also pets and potted plants. I mean, the WHO is already on the way to that. They have this new holistic definition of health that also includes the entire planet. So human health is no longer prioritized. Why not extend the same concept to democracy also?
Why not?
Well, some people identify as cats or dogs, so...
And if I have a multiple personality, can I vote several times?
Yes.
Yes, of course.
Why not?
Oh, yeah, that's brilliant. So, Hans, yes?
About this, it's good to keep this in mind when people talk about our democracy, because we don't have a democracy according to that principle, and it's also a good way to combat this democracy. To say to conclude how impartial, how imperfect it is, and that we should increase the right to vote to include animals and 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds, and like communication guerrilla. It's very effective. So I invite people who are watching to destroy the system by making these demands. Sorry.
Right, but I mean, another point is that. Do we really need representative democracy? I mean, why is that needed? I mean, that might have made sense 200 years ago with limited means of communications, but nowadays there is no real justification for that. I mean,
Indeed.
Nowadays you get to vote. You get to vote from a basket, right? You can have a green politician or a blue or a red one, and in the end they are all the same. They are just differently painted, and they will all make the same stupid decisions. They will just vote the same way on all the major decisions. Right.
Yes.
I think, and I mean, even direct democracy, I mean, for example, you see it in Switzerland. I think some of the worst abuses have been prevented there. But even then, it's limited by access to information, right? And slanted information. And as long as you have these big media monopolies that filter and distort all kinds of information that reach the people and on which the people base their decisions and their votes, democracy still remains a farce, even if it should be direct. But I mean, this is also one problem with the EU, right? I mean, we have so many layers between the voter in the street and the bureaucrats that are being promoted to these top leadership positions, that this is it's a joke to refer to this as some kind of democratic institution. I mean, this is really totally removed from reality.
I'm not sure what Michael said, but can I add something about democracy?
Yes, of course.
Well, I was reading again my own article because I forget what I write. But the point that Gaetano Mosca was making, actually, the main point is that in any government, it doesn't matter what size, what age, it's always a ruling class which is ruling. That's the starting point, So he observed that there is always a ruling class which may actually be like 1% of the population, depending on the level. And this ruling class is, according to Machiavelli, is actually made of people with ambition. They're not necessarily psychopaths. They're just people, according to Machiavelli, with virtue, what he called virtue, which is basically more like virility, manhood, so strong ambition and strong desire to lead. So democracy is a lie based on, because it's the idea, according to Rousseau, actually, who had a strong influence on the whole ideology of democracy, that the people are ruling. The people is ruling as an entity. But of course, that's even Rousseau himself, I think, ended up understanding that there's no such thing as the people. People's sovereignty, the people is sovereign, So because there is no king, the king used to be sovereign, but if we get rid of the king, then the people is supposed to be sovereign. But that's an impossibility because it's only a ruling class that is. So the question is how to get the best ruling class, how to select. But there are many problems, according to Gaetano Mosca, because the ruling class tends to be endogamic. They tend to form a real class. They marry within the same milieu and so on. So that's the problem. I just wanted to add this, even if sorry if it's not connected to what has been said before. As I said, I have very bad connection, so maybe it looks better now. Yeah, that's another aspect of the problem of democracy, as defined as the people, the people being sovereign.
Yes.
Yeah, that's very much the idea of Rousseau, but Rousseau certainly didn't live as he wrote, and and it came to
No.
conclusions that are very far removed from real world. Among which his ideas that man in a state of nature is a perfect being, and all of that nonsense. But he was arguably the most staunch promoter of democracy. But again, as Laurent already said, very locally it could work. But
that's what he said.
Yes,
that's what he said. In smaller states, it may work, but in the bigger the state, the more difficult it is to establish democracy. Yeah.
Yes. And that's what I meant with the sort of bourgeoisie mentality, and Ortega y Gasset also writes about this, of course, in Rise of the Mass Man, or Revolt of the Masses, in which the ordinary man, the mass man, is average in everything. In his preference for music, in his preference for food, in his preference for culture and art and architecture. And from these people, our government and our leaders have arisen, and they have no taste. They are not men of taste, let's say, as Simpson says in Which Way, Western Man. You need a government. If we have a ruling class, then at least let it be people who have an appreciation for truth, beauty, and goodness, and those are fundamentally aristocratic values. And what we have is people who are solely motivated by power and gain. At least that's what I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
Charles.
So in the beginning, in the United States, citizenship and voting was based upon owning land. And that sort of idea has been disparaged over the decades and over the centuries. But it was based upon the idea that if you own land, you are invested in an area. You care about what happens to it. You can't just jump up and leave when things go bad. You have to endure it. And that develops character and virtues.
Yes.
And so, is this known by the ruling elite? Is this one of the reasons for the attempts to constantly take land away from average people or the middle class or whatever, to make them less invested so that they can control the political apparatus more and more?
I would say that's the direct motivation for the war on the farmers in our country, at least. There's an absolute war on farmers going on.
I know. I've sort of followed it a bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
All over Europe.
Right.
Not only in the Netherlands, all over
is,
Europe. In Italy, in France, yes.
Yes. And this is, of course, a very tainted statement now.
One farmer a week commits suicide in France. Has been going on for years.
And also this thing, which we see in Texas and the United States, allowing foreign nations to buy up large tracts of land.
Yes.
So China owned land in Texas, and apparently they're doing something about this now, at least in Texas. But I don't know how pervasive that is in the United States. Why are we allowing foreign nations to own land in a home nation? It makes no sense at all.
Well, even domestic people like Bill Gates, I believe Bill Gates is now the largest owner of farmland in the United States. So, even domestically. But of course, this is a terminology that was known in Europe as bloed on Boden, blood on soil. And it is, of course, the fact that farmers and people who live close to the land and the seasons of nature are landed and rooted people. And just as you said, you don't simply leave when things get bad, and you are attached to your landscape. And I think that is exactly the things that they are trying to destroy. Absolutely.
And the approach to this is often based upon your most fundamental sentiments about life. You know, Rene Guénon said that tradition is the transmission of a spiritual influence.
Yes.
Well, I mean, if you're a more nomadic type, you don't have the same sort of feeling as a family that's lived in the same locale for generations.
Yes.
And that can't just be implanted into your brain all of a sudden to where you can understand their perspective. And so, I mean, again, that's why I mentioned earlier the people who are in charge, they have no connection to the land or the people, and they can't be changed in midstream in the middle of their lives.
No.
Through rational argument or something like, some enlightenment idea that if we give them enough evidence, quote, they can change their mind and see, I think that's unrealistic.
Yes.
So, Laurent, please go ahead.
Well, I think the point about owning land versus owning money is also, when the aristocracy was land-owning aristocracy, it's true that made a big difference as compared to when we shifted to a bourgeois money aristocracy, because money has no nation, no how do I say? Money is international by nature. It's not that's a cliche to say that, but that's a big change. Of course, land owning aristocracy, even the Roman Republic was basically a land owning oligarchy in some way, but at least they owned the land. So they had an interest. That's a very important point. People today, who rule today, they don't own land. They have money. They have money power. So the money, they can buy anything anywhere. They're not attached to their country at all. Yeah.
Well, and another big difference between ancient leaders versus modern is they had to fight. They were expected to fight in the battles and in the wars. They're not now.
Yeah,
so to call these people Westerners in the same sense is a misnomer, really.
Yeah, that was one of the problems of the Roman Empire. The landowning class didn't fight anymore.
Right.
That was
at the end.
In the end, that was one of the problems. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They hired mercenaries.
Right.
Yes, Hans.
I think another something that we have sort of touched upon lightly, but we have sort of implicitly been referring to it, is that this decay of the ruling class and of democratic operatives, whatever they're called, politicians or whatever, can also be explained, is to be explained by the destruction of education. Education in Europe has been destroyed systematically ever since since the Second World War, but certainly since the 1980s and 90s. And you can see it's really terrible. The level of education in Germany, where 1/3 of the children that leaves grade school cannot read. The Netherlands, where people become teachers who don't even speak properly Dutch. In Italy, well, it's a total mess, and it has been it's sort of decaying now at an ever faster pace. But the process has been initiated, I think, somewhere in the 1980s, or accelerated in the 1980s and 90s. And that also explains the quality of the people that rule over us, that they have no education, they know nothing, and they have the only thing that differs them, makes them different from the people over whom they rule, is that they have more money and better connections. That's all.
So that's a very good point to why I am an aristocrat in all that I think society should be, is that at least aristocratic families hired the best of the best teachers there were available in the country to teach their children. Exactly. Alexander the Great, his father hired Aristotle to teach Alexander, and you know the European royalty, their palaces were just this hotbed of intellectuals, of people figuring things out, about doing science, doing all kinds of things, and they were exposed to the best teaching that was available, and they were also expected to travel all over the world, or at least over Europe, and get to know other cultures and learn to speak different languages. Most of the aristocrats spoke 7, 8, 9 languages, and they married, of course, into families that were also aristocratic. And now our politicians, most of them haven't even really finished a what you would call a college degree, let alone some sort of university degree.
Yes. Well, they have a title, but it's nothing.
Yeah,
it's worth nothing.
Well, I would say that most of the current so-called political leaders, I think they should still have got at least a halfway decent education. I mean, they were not educated after the 80s. I mean, some of them were, okay, sure, you have some green ministers of this and that, but for example, von der Leyen, she is 60 plus. I think she's almost 70. So I think she should have still gotten a decent education. So she is really simply just a negative selection from her generation, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, and of course, I would say that it's not just ineptitude. There's also just a factor of evil or malevolence. It's not just that they are stupid. There's also an organized demolishing of Europe.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
They still must have at least enough brains to float to the top, and even in the cesspool. Even that takes a certain amount of ability.
Yes. So, does anybody have to, have some final closing statements to this topic?
I was just thinking about, you mentioned evil, and what is evil? I think evil is the need to have greater and greater control over things. And so it makes me think of C.S. Lewis, the novel That Hideous Strength. It was the third novel in a trilogy called the Space Trilogy. And he talks about how these people who have taken over this university in this small university town in England, ultimately their goal is to control all life on Earth and to do away with all life because it can't be controlled, it can't be predicted exactly, and to sort of sanitize everything. I think that's the end point. He saw the end point of tyranny and of totalitarianism is to micromanage everything, whether it's inanimate objects, intelligent life, non-intelligent life. And it's just that novel made me see that point more than anything else, that evil is based upon ever greater control over everything. The need for that. It's the compulsion to have that. That's my opinion.
What's the title of the novel?
That Hideous Strength by C.S. Lewis, the English writer.
Okay.
It's the third book in a trilogy, but it's much longer than the first two books.
I think there's a very nice modern equivalent, and that's the Matrix trilogy. And that's, of course, a science fiction movie, but I think it is actually documentary because it outlines exactly the things that our elites want. They want a robotic control system. And eventually, the main character, Neo, meets the creator, basically, of the control system. And this guy is called the architect. And then this guy explains in a very cool monologue that the problem for the control system is choice. It is not calculable because human beings, counter to what we believe, are not rational. We make very irrational choices, and there is no calculating for irrationality. And I think that's why these elites are really trying to abolish choice. And somebody said earlier that we live in a very individualistic age, but to a certain extent they feel themselves individualistic, but are very much part of a collective. Having the choice between 30 kinds of peanut butter or 20 kinds of toothpaste really isn't freedom. It's just an elaborate system of control. So, yeah. Well, I think we should wrap it up unless somebody has some really pressing things to say. Then I think we have made a very nice podcast thus far, and I hope you all enjoyed contributing. And thank you very much to our viewers, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.